Presented by Nate Downing. Nate is a managing attorney at Gardner Law, where he advises FDA regulated clients on compliance, advertising and promotion, and a variety of regulatory matters. With expertise in pharmaceuticals, medical devices, medical foods, and nutritional supplements, Nate helps companies navigate complex FDA requirements. Over to you, Nate.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you, Mark. I'm going to get my slides up. So Mark really gave a good foundation for what I'm going to give a little bit deeper dive on. What I would like for you to take away is, law students in the crowd, whomever you might be, what is the framework to get these AI products on market? Things that mitigate, diagnose, cure, treat diseases, right? Those are what FDA regulates from a medical device standpoint. But I want to set the stage a little bit too. You have to think of a couple things first. One is there's a lot of good science out in the world. There's a lot of science taking advantage of AI, of machine learning. That's very complex. And FDA has a lot of expertise in-house, but they cannot have expertise in every area that we're going to encounter, right? So at times, you have to remember that we're interpreters. We've got to take the science from our clients, or if you're in-house from your company, you've got to put it into a package that FDA understands. And the second thing to remember is AI changes rapidly, right? The amount of new uses and potential use cases for AI is evolving. And as that evolves, you can imagine, as Mark alluded to too, the regulatory framework is not evolving nearly as quickly. And so it is much slower. You can imagine that we all know how long it takes for laws to get passed. Rulemaking can be quicker, but that still can take a while. And some guidance documents take years to become finalized. So you have to be able to interpret the science as well as fit it into an existing framework that's really never going to catch up with AI. And so I think part of what industry's pushback, even, and you saw on the slide from Mark, of trying to get too strict and regulate and legislate AI is you're always going to be behind because AI is always a few steps ahead just based on how the science works. And so when you think about those problems and the roles you play, and now you've got to understand how you're going to get from a concept of maybe a life-changing, a life-altering treatment, incorporating AI and get it onto the market and get it through the FDA and be able to tell a story that everyone understands and be able to prove safety and effectiveness. So the way that I'm going to get us there, in my half hour is we're going to talk about the FDA regulation of AI, which Mark touched on, but we're going to kind of get a little bit deeper and then talk about some of the challenges you might face and then talk about how do you mitigate those challenges. A lot of it comes to being able to partner with FDI. And so one good thing is you can see the FDA approval of AI devices over time is just increasing. And so the familiarity at FDA is also increasing. And so even though you might have a novel treatment, there's a lot of issues that FDA has already encountered, which is always important because their guidance is going to be based on experience instead of trying to guess at the path ahead. And so it's also just interesting to think about that number constantly increasing. That also means your competition, your competitors are also going to have ideas. And so making sure that, your ideas stay fresh on the marketplace. So once again, wearing FDA shoes. If you're ever going to work with FDA, you've got to be able to communicate in a way that you are partnering, right? There's a little bit of an adversarial relationship, but there's also a lot of partnership that has to take place because everyone has the same goal. They want to get products that can help public health onto the market. And so once again, AI is exploding and the FDA is following a regulatory structure that was not made for AI. It can accommodate AI, but it wasn't made for AI. And so that means there's interpretation that has to occur on guidance, on regulations, on standards, on how do you prove safe and effective for a product that's constantly changing based on data input versus how did you prove safe and effective on a device 10 years ago that always gave the same output and it was always preset by a physician. There was no changing. And then FDA is trying to keep up with this innovation while understanding their main charge of protecting public health. So Mark touched on this, but it's always a good reminder, AI, and this is from an FDA website, is broadly defined science and engineering of making these intelligent machines, intelligent computer programs. They use techniques such as models based on statistical analysis of data, right? That's really important to understand that if you're going to be capturing data and using it to guide how your device is going to treat, well, not only does FDA want to understand the statistical analysis that goes into that, but where are those data being gathered? Are they being gathered from a source that allows for accurate interpretation of the model? Are they being gathered from a wide enough base that now the patient population you're going to treat is covered? So you can already see that's not just a, do you have a device that does what you say? It's, do you have a device that does what you say while also properly incorporating whatever the algorithm being used for the machine learning for the AI is? And then the machine learning is an AI technique that's used to design and train software algorithms to learn from and act upon those data. And so, why is this important in healthcare? Well, we can imagine we're always seeking better treatment for patients, right? Everyone who's in this space, no matter what our role is, there's really one common denominator, and that's, can we get better treatment to patients, safe treatments to patients, um, in an efficient manner, all of the things that go into a healthcare system. And so AI and ML are used to derive new insights from the enormous amount of data that's generated. You can imagine every patient, every visit, every procedure, every study, all the amount of data that are gathered. And those data tell lots of stories, but it's hard to always parse out the stories and gather what's relevant and what might be important from each data set because of just the amount. And so AI and ML can be used to help crawl through those data, find what is important, what's going to help this certain patient in their treatment journey, and that can create more effective and efficient healthcare. Also, AI/ML, they learn from real world use and experience and can improve its own performance. In the last few years, FDA has issued guidance documents on the real world evidence. And so it's one thing to do a clinical study, right? And oftentimes what you'll see is a company will launch a clinical study and the numbers will look great, right? They're going to have a primary endpoint typically that they're going to need to meet to be able to get market authorization. And that endpoint, that those numbers might look great, but typically that might be the ceiling at times of the treatment because it's with physicians who intimately know the product, who have been trained as part of a protocol, who have a very specific protocol to follow. And then you launch a product into the real world, it might not be the same, right? And so AI/ML can look at these real world data and say, hey, we're not performing the same. What might be the difference? What's the delta from the clinical study to its real world use? And how can we help industry get patients up to the efficacy that we saw in these clinical studies? And so being able to utilize AI and ML and parse through those data, all the real world data that can be generated, and then improving its own performance, you can see how enticing that is, both from an industry perspective, from a regulatory perspective, and ultimately physicians and patients. Manufacturers are using AI ML to innovate their products to assist healthcare providers and improve patient care. And once again, all of those data tell so many stories. And if you can find the right combination and the right algorithm, you can really have an effective product. So I think this is, we're talking about it. This is not the first conference I've been to speak on it. I've spoken on it multiple times, and it's because AI is perhaps the most transformational technology of our time, and healthcare is perhaps its most pressing application. So how is AI and ML in healthcare used? Well, you can predict post-surgical outcomes. A lot of surgery carry risk, right? And so not every surgery has the outcome desired. And so being able to better predict what the outcomes might be, allow patients and physicians to make better decisions on whether they should undergo a certain surgery or what might it look like from a perspective of post-operative healing, remote surgery, being able to learn, being able to treat more patients further away, right? And assisting in diagnosing. Diagnoses take times. I work with some companies who treat rare diseases, and a patient's journey to get diagnosed can be 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 years. And that's not the physician's, malpractice. That's them following the mantra of when you hear hoofbeats, you look for horses, right? So they're trying to go through their list with the best technology they have. But if AI and ML can take a holistic view of a patient and assist in diagnosing and get to an earlier diagnosis, you can imagine the treatment can begin sooner, ultimately leading to potential better outcomes for that patient. Once again, help manage the amount of overwhelming data there are. And that's always going to be a big help for science, right? Science loves data, the FDA loves data, but how do you manage those data? And then additional applications are constant in this space. There's always new ideas. There's some startup forming today probably that has an excellent idea and a very worthwhile application. And those are a constant in this space. So Mark touched on this too, but I'm going to go a little bit deeper. The FDA regulation of medical devices. So the evolving nature of medical devices that utilize AI and ML differentiate them really in a meaningful way from traditional medical devices. Um, a single model or version of device is typically improved upon and released as a new model or version, right? So we'll use a PMA device, you've got your approval. It's approved for a very specific indication, a very specific range in which the treatment can be delivered if it's something that provides a treatment. And that is what the physician can use until industry goes back and submits a new application for either a new PMA or a supplement, right? That's how change works for a device standpoint. So traditionally, FDA reviews these devices through whether it's a 510(k), de novo, or pre-market pathway. So a little bit deeper into a 510(k). So if your device has a legally marketed predicate device that is not exempt from pre-market notification, each submitter must receive an order that says that your device is substantially equivalent and now it can be marketed. Substantial equivalence is very technical, and it's a review that the industry puts together, a package that says, hey, FDA, here's why we're substantially equivalent to this predicate device. And you've got to talk about technology, patient, population, mechanism of action, safety, risk classifications, all of those things go into determination of substantial equivalence. And so what you have is different classifications that talk about whether you can be in a 510(k), whether you could be a de novo or ultimately a PMA. And so I have a list of those classifications here. And it really is, are you low, are you a moderate, or do you sustain human life or of substantial importance in preventing the impairment of human health or present a really unreasonable risk of illness or injury? Oftentimes that's found in like a long-term implant, something that's in the patient for years, making sure that there's no chemicals within the implant that could harm, and other considerations. And so in a 510(k) sense, you're doing a pre-market submission made to demonstrate that it's safe, as safe and effective to a legally marketed device. And so you have to do a comparison of your marketed device to a device already on the market. And when you're talking about artificial intelligence, you can see how that can become difficult because of the purpose of AI, of ML, right? Is it's unique? Is it's different from something on market? And so having a good argument, having a good basis for your substantial equivalence discussion with FDA allows you to get to market faster, right? Because a 510(k) is from a FDA review standpoint is your fastest path to market. And so what are some devices incorporating AI that have required a 510(k)? So step back. Remember at the very beginning, we talked about, what my role is, what your future role might be if you're going to get into the similar type of work is an interpreter to FDA from this industry to FDA. But you also have to work backwards too. You also have to be able to guide your company. And you have to understand, is it a 510(k)? Might it be a de novo? Might it be a PMA? There's millions of dollars in spend and could potentially be years of different timing to market based on that answer. And so one thing you want to do is you want to look at other device types. What has FDA cleared? What has they given market authorization via de novo for? And what has ultimately required a PMA? Because that's going to guide your own assessment of your client's device. And so spinal implants have been used for some time to help with various spinal defects. They can be a 510(k) if they fit within a specific product code. And the AI is there to help guide the size potentially of the implant. What might their projection be? How are they going to heal post-surgery? What might be their range of motion after an implant? Um, and so a lot of these implants that require the customization utilize AI. Recently, AI is utilized to predict the outcomes based on dimensions and location of implants. So you can see how spinal implants are even evolving within their clearance of a 510(k) to allow for more as long as they can continue to argue substantial equivalence to a predicate device. So then there's a de novo. This is really a device that does not fit in the 510(k) pathway because you can't find a predicate. That's the easiest way to say it. Um, and so they're typically class one or two, and they're going to be used for future predicates, but at the time, you don't have that predicate device. And so you're trying to provide a reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness for that intended use. And then you have to also understand that you might need clinical evidence. So in a 510(k), I think it's like, a small percentage require clinical evidence. The vast majority don't. And that saves companies a lot of time and money. When you get to a de novo classification, while the review period is only about 60 days longer, you might now, or you're more likely to require clinical evidence. And that's very important both for your company, your client to understand, and also what FDA is looking at now is a clinical study that's going to provide data to give assurance, reasonable assurance of the safety and effectiveness of your device. And so you can see now the standard has gone up a little bit. If you're a 510(k), your pathway to market is simpler, if you will, as long as you can prove substantial equivalence. If you're de novo, it's a little bit more complex. And here are some devices that incorporate AI that have required a de novo in the past. And so a device that detects lesions within the GI tract. It relies on an advanced software algorithm. There was no predicate. This algorithm alerts when an image contains a potential lesion. So you can see the risk classification too is high because if there's an error, you could have missed a lesion that could have been cancerous or whatever else they're looking for. Due to this mechanism, it's an advanced software algorithm incorporating AI, a predicate was not available. And so you have to look not just on the device and what you're treating, but also the mode in which your device treats. And that algorithm was such a major component of this device that you could not find a predicate, so they had to take a de novo path. And then pre-market approval. This is the process of a scientific and regulatory review to evaluate the safety and effectiveness of a class 3 medical device. Class 3 devices, as I discussed above, support sustained human life. It's just that their risk classification is high. Failure could lead to loss of life, serious injury, etc. And so a PMA approval, now you get approval here, right? A 510(k), you get clearance. De novo, you get market authorization. PMA, you get an actual approval based on a determination by the FDA that you contain enough valid evidence to assure the device is safe and effective for its intended use. So what does it look like for a device incorporating AI that required a PMA? A breast imaging system that results in a breast cancer diagnosis, right? So cancer is life-threatening. This is if this device misses the diagnosis, it could have disastrous impacts on that patient. So FDA wants a PMA so they can have the level of evidence required to say it's safe and effective. It also allows to differentiate between benign and malignant masses using AI. So you can see that the AI component there is very strongly tied to the safety and effectiveness of the device. It has a similar use of other AI products that were able to be cleared as a 510(k), but intended use plays a large role in classification. What that means is when FDA is looking at risk of a device, if you have a device that is what's called adjunctive, or it's going to supplement existing standard of care, your risk might be lower because they're already doing what they should expect to do from a physician standpoint, and now it's almost like a secondary check. If you are trying to be more of a primary means of diagnosis, then your risk classification goes up because the results of a misdiagnosis could be more disastrous because you don't have a secondary check or you're not adjunctive to the current standard of care. So FDA looks very closely at your intended use and whether it's going to be adjunctive to a standard of care or whether it's going to be a fully new treatment, and that helps FDA understand your risk profile and ultimately guide the type of submission you could require. So think about the traditional review of device modifications, right? So you get approved, and then FDA reviews and clears modifications to medical devices, including software, depending on the significance or risk posed to the patients presented by the modification. When applicable, the change in a medical device would trigger the requirement that a manufacturer submit a new pre-market notification to the FDA. So in a 510(k) sense, there's a very good change assessment document that FDA has that says, okay, if your changes fall within these categories, you can do what's called the letter to file, just document the change as part of your change control process and move forward. If it's a serious enough change, you have to do a full new 510(k), which, as you can imagine, that's a lot of work and a lot of money. Under the traditional FDA regulatory framework, changes to software require these new risk assessments to determine whether the change affects the functionality or risk category before releasing each change. That is, the algorithm is essentially locked, right? So we're talking in a machine learning and an AI sense. You're going to lock that algorithm out for future advancement until you've had these regulatory submissions. And you can see that that might defeat the optimization of the AI ML technology. You're looking at a technology that can fastly learn, fastly change, and essentially improve, but it has to have time constraints. And so you can always say you're behind a little bit on your treatment if you have to follow the traditional pathway. And so what are some market pathway challenges? Well, device classification. It's very difficult sometimes to put the AI, the ML capabilities into like a nice box and say, okay, well, here's the risks if it doesn't work. Here are the safeguards that we can have in place, the special controls potentially for a class 2 that allow us to launch this product but have continued post-market surveillance. The intended use, right? The intended use of an AI ML device could change based on the data, and it could potentially help patients, but FDA only allows you to market your device for your approved or cleared intended use. And so you have to be flexible in considering what your intended use is. And sometimes I'll tell clients, take a phased approach, go to FDA with your initial, but make sure you understand that you've got some fast follow submissions that might come. Or as we'll see later, and Mark alluded to, there's some change control plan documents we can take advantage of. And then predicate devices. This is always a very big challenge, and this is whether you are an AI/ML device or not. Do you have an actual predicate that FDA will say provides a basis for substantial equivalence? Or is your technology, your algorithm so unique, so novel that you can't take advantage of the 510(k) pathway, which once again triggers potential requirements for clinical study and then a little bit longer review period. So changes. Well, FDA has already approved, authorized, or cleared over 500 devices. FDA continues to receive an increasing number of marketing submissions as well as pre-submissions for these enabled medical devices. The traditional approach to the regulation of these hardware-based medical devices is not well suited for this faster iterative design and development and type of validation used for these software functions. So FDA's traditional paradigm of medical device regulation is not designed for these adaptive AI and ML technologies, right? And so FDA, they have the framework to approve these devices and work with it. So they've got to be creative to help industry make sure that the treatments that they're delivering are as late and up to date and state of the art as they can be. So here are some devices that went through, we talked about, and the point of these slides is to say, if you're a PMA, if you're a pacemaker delivering neuromodulation, implanted drug delivery system, and you require a PMA, those timelines are great, right? If you're a 510(k), your ablation, balloon dilation, certain imaging, your timeline and pathway to market is a little bit quicker. And so understanding the type of devices that go under a PMA and then the type of treatments, right, life-sustaining treatments that they could provide, and the sometimes 180 could be a year review of changes at least, and that's not considering the documentation required to provide to FDA when you make those changes, we're stuck, right? we don't want to be always 2 to 3 years behind in the treatment that's being provided to patients. And so FDA understands this, and working within their current framework, we're going to start to see some evolution in their thinking on how they are going to allow industry to provide changes in the marketplace while staying safe and effective. So in 2019, FDA had a discussion paper, and then a 2021 plan action followed that started to provide the idea of what's called a predetermined change control plan. Now, this is going to be very important language for clients who have an AI ML device. It's really helpful for anybody, but very important for AI and ML. And under this plan, manufacturers are required to submit specific things, a detailed description of the specific plan device modifications, the methodology to develop, validate, and implement these modifications in a manner that will ensure the continued safety and effectiveness of the devices, right? FDA, anytime they're looking at a change, they're making sure that that safe and effective determination made prior still stands. And so they need to have data, they need to have proper evidence that shows that, yes, you can place this change device on the marketplace, because if not, it could be an adulterated device. And then also FDA wants to know an impact assessment. So this is a future-looking thing for FDA. So they want an impact assessment to assess the benefits and risks of planned modifications and risk mitigations. So along comes a guidance document. So on April 3rd, 2023, there was a draft guidance. It's already been finalized December 4th. And it's about making submission recommendations for a predetermined change control plan for artificial intelligence, machine learning enabled device software functions. Now, what's important to know about this is a tool that can be utilized and should be utilized to allow changes to be made after market authorization. It's whether it's a 510(k), a de novo, or a PMA, changes made to a device that do not require pre-approval from FDA. And so now we're getting FDA's attempt to say, hey, we understand that AI ML is changing. It has the ability to treat patients more efficiently, more effectively. So let's get the documentation together beforehand. This is often done during your market submission, and say, show us what kind of changes you will make, what the evidence you will gather are, and give us an impact assessment. So we can say, yes, you can make these changes without any input from FDA. And that's a huge benefit. Honestly, this can save months or years of time to market, and you can imagine the benefits for patients. And so what does this give you? Well, better predictability for launch timing. If you're representing industry, you have to understand every month, every 2 months, all of that is burned in their capital. And that's an important decision, whether we like to admit it or not, on how things can be moved forward, because every company has a finite amount of money. So if you can be more predictable in the ability to launch new capabilities, your business is going to be more predictable. So there's cost savings associated with less regulatory submissions. And ultimately, what those two lead to is more development, more market benefits. And in the end, all of this will allow patients to realize the benefits of aggregated data sooner, right? As we kicked off with, there's so much data being gathered. There is so much good information. And if companies can point to the type of data they're going to collect, the way it's going to be used to improve their device, they can launch those changes to patients much sooner than they could have in the past. So Mark touched a little bit on the next couple slides that I have that I'm going to move through pretty quickly. But this is not the only thing that FDA has done to allow for innovation. They have talked, there's guidance, there's 21st Century Cures Act on certain types of software that don't require FDA oversight. And what that allows is, if someone's going to be putting together an application to assist physicians, as long as they meet certain elements, they can get that device, that software, that application on market much sooner while it's still fresh, right? While it's still a very useful technology, and it allows physicians to start taking advantage of certain devices quicker. And so that stems from the 21st Century Cures Act. And that's really important to note that, this act of Congress was really getting in front of AI almost 9 years ago. And so there is good legislation that can be crafted that helps the FDA and helps industry meet their goals of treating patients while remaining safe and effective. And so I'm just going to close with this. Remember, AI is complex. The laws and regulations lag behind. And that can be a good thing too, right? if we're trying to put it into a box and regulate everything, it might not be able to result in the best treatment for patients. But it is complex and the language doesn't always exist. And so being able to interpret your product to FDA and relate it as well as you can to existing framework is going to be a great predictor of success. Device classification is difficult because of the ever-changing capabilities of AI and ML and the complex algorithms. You might not have a great predicate in the market. Proving safety and efficacy, making sure you've got a clinical study, if required, that has opened as much of the capabilities of your device as possible, because ultimately you get to market what you prove. Post-market, making sure that you've got a post-market change control plan in place so that you can deliver care to patients as soon as it's available, and being able to predict the type of changes you want to make will allow better treatment and better predictability. And I just want to put a quick bullet in on advertising and promotion, because that's where the public, that's where FDA most sees the way that you're going to present your device, and making sure you have a plan in place for compliant, non-misleading advertising and promotion will allow you to safely market your device. Um, you'll see these slides. There's some considerations here on mitigating device risks. Obviously, things like cybersecurity, a good quality system. If your AI device is connected, you're going to make, FDA is going to want to know that you can withstand attacks, for example, and you're going to have requisite documentation to prove that. So just some things as you get into a development stage you want to consider. And I'll close with, be open with FDA. Communicate early, communicate often. If you have a very unique or novel treatment device or whatever it is, algorithm, get in front of FDA. They're always receptive to a informational pre-submission, a pre-submission where you can let them know about your device and have a good question and answer session. Always be honest. The FDA knows that AI is important. The government knows AI is important and it's not going away. So partnering now from an industry standpoint also allows you to have a seat at the table. And so if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them now. Can also take them during the session at the end on the panel. But thank you. And I really hope that, we all realize that FDA is working hard to understand AI, and the more we partner with FDA, the better they'll understand it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nate. So we'll save those questions till the end so that we can keep on time here.